This is quite a salient location. Decommissioned warehouse on one side of the road, unexplained artwork, it's a slab of something, and what was the swimmer's lane is now a private road, which is horribly ironic. Originally, when that was not an academy but it was a school, all the school kids learnt to swim by just walking across the road into this building. It was a very useful facility. Now they have no swimming pool, and this building has been shut and is totally abandoned, waiting for a development package. Having arrived to live here in the 1960s, I've seen a series of changes where London became different things, but to the point where it is now, this is in 2017, I think it's no longer reachable by the forms of writing that I've practiced for 40 odd years. And therefore, in a sense, that sort of cycle of London is coming to an end. And obviously a new London emerges. But for me, it's a last London, because the written London, the London that had a past and that referred back to previous writers, always one generation drew on what had come before, I think is over, because you're now wedded to a kind of instant, dominant present tense of the electronic digital world, where people no longer move around in the city but above the city. They're floating on their devices. The inspiration for the book The Last London came from a figure who used to sit on this bench where the stains are on the floor, very much aligned with the sundial, the white sundial, which was like the compass of the boat, and he never moved. And this became obsessive to me, that this man could come in as soon as the park opened, round about this time in the morning, perch himself on his raft, stare south, ballasted by heavy bags, and I thought somehow he anchors the city, he drinks in the city without moving through the entire day. And here am I rushing off on my strange expeditions, and somehow I don't gather in anything more than he does, and he doesn't notice me or acknowledge me. I see him as I pass like a radar beacon, and that's it. And the story really came to fruition. He'd been here for maybe a couple of years, and I'd been thinking about him and asking about him, but there was no information available. And I did a night walk around London, around the London Overground circuit with Andrew Cotting. And we started off at about 7 o'clock at night. It was in a winter's night, it was dark. And at the end of our entire night's walk, we were coming back the following morning about 10 o'clock. And I detoured us. I said, we've got to go into the park. And sure enough, here was this guy on his spot. And I pointed him out to Andrew and said something of this story and about how much he seemed to represent what's happening in London, the invisibles, the people who are left in bushes, the ones who disappear and who aren't seen by the people skittling by on their electronic devices. And Andrew had a GoPro camera, and he decided to make a pass, and he went right past this man. And superstitiously, I thought this is not altogether a good thing, and maybe even trying to include him in my story isn't a good thing. It's a colonization of his own mythology. And after I'd slept and cleaned up and had a coffee, I came back out later that day, and he was gone, and he never reappeared. That was it. He disappeared, as if we'd broken some kind of prohibition. But the marks where he sat are still there. And there's even imprints in the wood itself. And so his presence is registered, but he's become part of a different kind of story by being filmed by Andrew Cotting. The one thing he did teach me was that London is an organic entity. It's a kind of prescient being. The whole city is interlinked. The material, the brick, the story of that brick, where it's come from in these columns, the grasses, the nature of the cobblestones, the memory of the park as being a gas and coke works, the bombs that fell here, the lives of the park keepers, the grass, the dog walkers, the joggers, All of this is making one complete organic thing, and if you take out one element, the whole thing trembles and loses some of its force. So in a sense, the encounter with him was very special, and became really the opening device that led me through the last London book I was doing. Everything I write is also backed up by images. My notebooks are this. This is sort of Brexit walk. We walk from Waltham Abbey down to the site of the Battle of Hastings in the footsteps of King Harold, who was supposedly buried in Waltham Abbey. So then, as we walk, I'm snapping away, and I use these memory prompts. There's John Rogers was there to start with, the drummer David, Claudia Barton singing. We passed through the landscape. While I was walking down to Croydon, I found on the pavement this mask. I picked it up. It's also like a boat or a bird, and there it is, an object like found on the street, but it becomes part of a book, part of a story, and then it's just chucked down into somewhere else. I like things to do with, I found a strange boot that seemed to fit with the idea of walking. Loads of tapes, all of it. This is like the history of all of the stuff I've written is piled up around me. Recently I've got very interested in the work of Effie Paleologu. She's from Athens, and she's lived in London for a while in this area, and she interrogates London in ways that are parallel to what I do, but much more intent and forensic. She's done an incredible program recently of looking at the patterns of chewing gum on the pavement and bringing great macro lenses to this. Effie seemed the perfect person for the final image for me of the last London, because the room where I typed and worked had a photograph on the wall by Mark Atkins of me down by the River Thames before any of the current developments. The bath upstairs started to leak, but I couldn't see this because there were mounds of boxes and books. And eventually, when I looked at it, the photograph was entirely destroyed. So I got Effie to photograph the photograph. And this is the kind of icon of the final days of London, like Richard Jefferies after London. London had become swamp and mud. And she then looked at the back of the photograph and started to film the patterns of decay. And you saw London as really beautiful in its decay, as if it was a pair of shredded lungs that had been turned to lace. And Effie got all that beautifully in the same way that she could read the traces of London by looking at the pavement. Picking up books was something I did, and objects and funny bits and pieces, and needing eventually to nest them around me, to build them around me, which were the stories that I would tell were all derived from things that reached around me. This is long before the internet. So as I was working at the desk there, I always knew I could reach up to this shelf here, and here's such and such a book by Angela Carter. And I would look at that and feed in something would become part of the colour and texture of what I was writing. So in a sense, this room, where this, cave, it's not really a room anymore, in a terraced house in Hackney, is essentially a map of my brain. It's from which all the journeys begin. And I think without this, I couldn't go out into London. Seems like a demonstration of Jarrett Kobeck in his book I Hate the Internet reckons that basically the entire culture is emerging from the comic strip or the graphic novel, and if you keep peeling back, you end up with a kind of world of heavy-bosomed ladies in minimal costume confronted by some green monster. And Hackney has decided to prove this thesis with this wall. While you were filming, you were yourself being filmed, of course. This guy who's walked, because the area is devouring itself, cannibalized in imagery, and it's a monster eating itself with images of images of images all the way through until we just disappear into a great white dot. That's quite interesting, but I think we'll go down here. In the yard on this side you have the old containers as genuine containers, and here you have the customized containers of the new Hackney. Most of what we're told is not believable. Most of what announces itself has a qualification to it. If you're transport for London, you have to have a bracket behind it that says every journey matters. If you're Volker Highways digging up holes all over Hackney, you have a bracket behind it, considerate constructors. So there's this sort of double-edged, upbeat message always banging into your head. Every surface is covered with computer-generated utopias promising something that doesn't exist. You've got nice contrast here within yards of each other. You have the rough sleepers on that ledge. The next ledge, under a railway arch, has got a table of folk with cafetières and croissants having their breakfast as if in one of the CGI visions, and it's just maybe 10, 15 yards beyond the ledge disputed between rats and swans and rough sleepers in their encounter. How desperate really do you have to be to live somewhere like that? And there's never been such a division between the very rich, the sort of kleptocracy, the seriously wealthy with their investment silos and their vanity towers, and the invisibles, the rough sleepers, the socially excluded, the people who are picked up by immigration authorities, challenged. They're just sliding away or being pushed further and further out, more and more excluded. People burrow in and sleep there. There's sleeping bags left. There's other places further down where I found camps with 20 or 30 people just sleeping against anywhere there's a bit of scrub, a bit of hedge, a warm wall. You know, they're hidden away there. They disappeared of the city. The next thing I'd like to write about is Peru. Yeah, Peru. My great-grandfather had quite an interesting and adventurous life, but having lost his money or blown his money at a certain stage, he took on a trip into quite extreme territory in Peru that had not been looked at, towards the headwaters of the Amazon, with a view to seeing if you could plant coffee. And he'd been sent by the Peruvian corporation, had been given this enormous tranche of land, but basically to take over the infrastructure with railways and mines. But then they thought, well, there's all this other stuff, let's see if we can plant something. And he had been a planter in Ceylon, and he'd been a gold miner in Tasmania, and he thought, well, okay, and off he went with two other Scotsmen, and he wrote a book that described these journeys and ventures in Peru, which I've had around for a long time. But I read it closely, and I thought, God, this is everything I've done has stemmed from this. That his style is very similar to mine, except instead of writing about the A13, he's talking about the Amazon, and he has these astonishing encounters. And I thought it would be rather wonderful at this stage to go back and try and find the source of whatever impulses have brought me to write. I certainly couldn't have done that till I'd worked out, resolved what I thought of as the difficulties of writing and describing London. I feel quite liberated from that now.